Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Richard Beasley. Richard Beasley, born in 1959, was from Akron, Ohio. He was mainly raised by his mother, who worked as an office worker. After finishing school, Richard became a mechanic. He had a criminal history that included a 5-year prison sentence in Texas for burglary, followed by 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio under a new identity and tried to create a positive image by pretending to be a pastor and attending church regularly. During this time, he developed a drug addiction. Eventually, after being involved in a car accident, he stopped working and lost his source of income. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone Richard knew from the motorcycle network. Richard decided to mentor Brogan, discussing the value of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his moral conversations, Richard was actually living a double life. He had found an apartment near the road, where he sought search for girls in need, homeless people, and drug addicts for trafficking. The police eventually discovered his actions, forcing Richard to change his identity once more. As a result, he shifted his focus to exploit homeless and unemployed individuals, intending to steal their money and personal information. Noble County, located in southeastern Ohio, is a sparsely populated area characterized by vast, deserted forests. It was here that Scott Davis, a 48-year-old man, relocated from South Carolina after having worked in the state for about 15 years. To seeking better opportunities, Scott made the move to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. Scott came across a job posting on Craigslist that caught his attention. The job description read, "Simply care for a 688-acre property and raise cattle." The position pays $1,300 a week and have the opportunity to live a beautiful 2-bedroom mobile home. Although older and single individuals are preferred, but all qualified individuals will be considered. This is a short-term opportunity, so call now to apply. The benefits highlighted in the listing appealed to Scott, who was desperate for a job, and he decided to contact the employer early. After Scott heard back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the job ad, he was quickly accepted for the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta. At the restaurant, Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan, who both appeared to be genuine farmers. Their trustworthy appearance made Scott feel at ease. Then, Richard conducted an initial interview and asked Scott to join him in the car to visit the job site. They drove to a remote forest area with no cell phone reception. Suddenly, Richard said to Brogan, who was driving, that "Can they stop here? He need to grab some equipment for the farm, near where they had shot the deer last time." After that, Richard and Scott got out of the car. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest, with Richard following behind Scott. As they walked, Scott heard a clicking sound behind him, followed by some mumbling. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood he was the target next in line. Just as Richard was about to pull the trigger, Scott swiftly pushed the gun away, and the bullet struck his elbow instead. Scott then took off running, and Richard chased him, gunfire ringing in his ears, with bullets whizzing past and the sound of breaking trees and branches behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the barrel of the revolver aimed at him. Stunned and terrified, he froze momentarily before he sprinted away. Scott was lost and unfamiliar with his surroundings, but that didn't matter to him. All that mattered was making his escape. Richard, the gunman, shot at him as he fled, hitting him in the arm and making him fall. Just as Richard was about to take another shot, Scott, despite his injury, got back on his feet and ran, with blood pouring from his wounded arm. Hoping to escape the gunfire, Scott hurried to his right and slipped between 2 large trees. He started descending a small, slippery slope, almost losing his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. As he slid down, he flailed his arms to keep his balance, unaware of the pain from his gunshot wound. He knew he couldn't afford to fall. If he did, his chances of survival would vanish. Then, he began to run once more. He heard the gunfire of the revolver right behind him for the second time. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away, causing a rush of air. "Oh God, he's not going to let me live," he thought again. Scott took refuge in a thicket of brambles and underbrush, ignoring the thorns and hooks that tore at his skin, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His only focus was to escape the maniac with the gun, Richard. Another gunshot echoed, startling him and led him to run even faster. His heart raced, his ears buzzed from the noise. And he shook from the sweat that drenched him. When Scott finally broke free from the thick undergrowth, he paused briefly. He felt disoriented, unsure of his next steps. All around him was dense vegetation, trees, bushes, and bare branches, and the murderer was still pursuing him. He could hear the sounds of someone crashing through the brush he had just escaped, and he realized he couldn't afford to stop. He needed to continue running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard his attacker getting closer, followed by the sound of a gunshot. He realized he was nearing his end, and the thought filled him with dread. He sprinted faster, but stumbled and fell, sweat stinging his eyes and obscuring his vision. His head spun, and all he could hear was a deafening ringing in his ears. Then, he struggled to keep running. His heart raced as if it would explode from his chest, and he finally stopped. He spotted a small ditch surrounded by thick plants and scattered fallen branches. He quickly ducked behind a large tree, straining to listen for the gunman. Scott could sense the fear radiating from himself as he groaned softly. He noticed that his arm was bleeding heavily, yet he didn't feel any pain at that moment. As his heartbeat began to stabilize, his hearing returned to normal. He could hear dogs barking in the distance and crows cawing from nearby trees. He listened carefully, hoping to detect if anyone was following or searching for him, but the forest was unusually quiet. Hiding there, he felt a mix of shock, pain, and trembling fear. Eventually, he became convinced that he had escaped his attacker, and he felt immense relief. Even after he was certain the murderer was leave, Scott needed 7 more hours to feel safe enough to seek help. When he found the chance to escape, he located a house and called the police. Noble County detectives arrived about 15 minutes later, and Scott told the officer everything, tell about Richard and the chase. Remarkably, he survived an 8-hour pursuit. Unfortunately, not all victims were as fortunate. Scott wasn't the first person to respond to that job posting. In fact, hundreds of people had applied and been accepted over the months before Scott's incident. After Scott escaped a life-threatening situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he had met Richard and Brogan. However, they faced a setback. A fire in the surveillance room the night before had damaged the recordings, making recovery difficult and time-consuming. Meanwhile, the media reported on a man who posted fake job ads on Craigslist to lure victims into the woods, where he killed them. The shocking story has garnered widespread attention of many. In August 2011, 56-year-old Ralph Geiger was experiencing a difficult period in his life. He was unemployed and living in a homeless shelter in Akron, Ohio. After losing his job, he faced significant challenges. Ralph had graduated high school in the 1970s and moved to California, where he worked with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and successfully started his own business, where he was able to hire employees and make a living by renovating homes and taking on various jobs. However, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he could no longer afford his rent, leading to his move into a homeless shelter. He lost his apartment and faced many hardships. Ralph was a lifelong bachelor, which meant he didn't have to worry about supporting a wife and children. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who is 26 and considers him like a father, often mentioned this about him. They developed a strong bond after he hired her to help clean his house many years ago. Ralph was known for his willingness to assist friends. In the summer of 2011, he visited the library every day to search for job opportunities. By the end of July, he excitedly told Summer he had landed a great job managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job not only provided him with a free mobile home but also a salary of $300 a week. Summer was thrilled for Ralph, believing he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph was happy and saw the job as an opportunity to regain his independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and said him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without hearing from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to reach him multiple times on his mobile phone, but each time, she only got his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. When she called the number again, someone else answered, indicating that Ralph's number had been reassigned. Despite her worries about Ralph, Summer chose not to report him missing, as she wasn't certain he was actually gone. Ralph had disappeared in the past but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauley, who have had a hard time in recent years. His divorce 2 years earlier had left him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting over in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After the divorce, David found comfort in using the computer and often browsed the web. One night in October 2011, he came across a Craigslist ad that piqued his interest. He discovered a job advertisement in the Help Wanted section for a farm caretaker position on a 688-acre farm located in rural Ohio. The job pays $1,300 a week and includes free use of a trailer on the property. Curious and excited about this opportunity, David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, thought that taking a break from the city would be a significant change. Rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, felt like a promising option for the change he desired. The fact that he would have a free place to stay would also help him save money. David decided to respond to the advertisement and soon received a reply. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, frequently communicated with him. On October 22, 2011, she received a call from him while he was staying Red Roof Inn, Parkersburg, West Virginia, on his way to Ohio. David was very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He spoke about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life there. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David talked for a bit, with Deborah wishing her younger brother good luck and reminding him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, they had no idea it would be their last conversation. David's sister, unable to reach him for some time, saw news reports and contacted the police. They quickly realized that David was yet another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest where Richard had tried to murder Scott. After searching for 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and nearby, they discovered a grave that had been dug in advance for Scott. A K-9 unit was called in, and soon after, they noticed something unusual. They uncovered another body buried in the damp soil, which had been shot in the back of the head. This body was identified as David Pauley. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave containing an unidentified body. The sheriff's office in Noble County requested assistance from the FBI to track down the person who had posted a job advertisement related to the case. They needed the FBI to trace the poster using the IP address and the details of the advertisement. It became apparent that the advertiser was searching for a particular individual, someone who could vanish without attracting much attention or concern. During the interview, Richard would not hire applicants mentioned they were married or had combat or martial arts skills. He was specifically seeking older men for the position. Additionally, he completely ignored responses from women who applied. The candidates who met his criteria were Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis. Another suitable applicant was Timothy Kern, who is 47 years old. Timothy Kern was a divorced father and living away from his 3 sons. To take a job in Ohio, he had to leave his children at home. He responded to a job advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after an incident involving Scott Davis. On November 12th, Timothy visited his sons to say goodbye before moving to Ohio. After he left, there was no further communication from him, which triggered the start of an investigation into his disappearance. About 2 weeks later, the FBI found that the IP address of the person who posted the advertisement was linked to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. He claimed he had not posted any ads on Craigslist and did not know anyone named Richard, but he did mention that a man had rented a room in his house. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner and recognized a man named Richard Beasley, who is a local from Noble. When Joe viewed the footage, he identified the man, but Richard had previously introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. Police had no idea they had found Ralph Geiger, Richard Beasley's first victim, buried in an unmarked grave. They also found Brogan Rafferty, Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken into custody. Brogan agreed to share all the details of Richard's actions and to testify in court in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was also present when Richard brought Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, where Richard later lured David and Scott. Brogan wrote a report of the incident and said that they led Ralph into the woods on a hot summer night. He recalled hearing a loud noise and then going back to the car to get a shovel. When he returned, Ralph was still there, and Richard had thrown Ralph's clothes into a trash bag along with some personal belongings. Brogan also described digging a hole that was waist-high and probably about 4 feet wide. They struggled to place Ralph's body in it and sprinkled lime over him as a baptismal ritual. After Richard stole Ralph Geiger's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He then found a job and took pleasure in his actions. Many victims arrived with most of their belongings in their cars, which Richard later sold. Scott Davis informed Richard that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview, and Richard was excited about that. The last victim of Richard was Timothy Kern. At 47 years old, he faced similar job struggles as the other victims. While looking for a new job, he found a promising opportunity that required him to relocate. However, Timothy was reluctant to move away from his children. Since his divorce in 1997, he had remained close to his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. He was not only a dedicated father but also an enthusiastic baseball coach, always making time for his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their relationships through social media, especially Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about a unique job opportunity managing a 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing that covered rent and utilities, and a generous weekly salary. His only worry was the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was concerned about being away from his family, the job was too great. He planned to move on Sunday, feeling a sense of regret about leaving his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He cherished the time he spent with his sons before departing the next morning. One of his sons received a message from he, expressing his love, but no one realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different site behind an abandoned shopping center in Akron. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were not initially aware of Richard's address, but they eventually apprehended him. Unbeknownst to Richard, Joe, his landlord, had talked to the police, which led them to track Richard's IP address. As a result, Richard contacted Joe both by phone and through messages, which allowed the police to locate him. Richard was arrested on November 16th, just 3 days after he killed Timothy. He faced charges for the murders of Ralph, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with various other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty were put on trial in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern. Brogan was offered a plea deal in which he would receive leniency if he provided information about Richard Beasley. However, he decided to reject the offer. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of aggravated murder. Even though Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to deny Richard's involvement when the key witness and one of the victims, Scott, agreed to testify. There was also a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including the victim's personal belongings and identification found at Richard's home. Although he tried to deny it, all the evidence proved him guilty. Richard's trial took place later that year, and he was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Police Court for resentencing, but the verdict did not change. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard participated in his sentencing via video link from the Chilo Correctional Institution. He was seated in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks. Richard's attorney argued against imposing multiple consecutive sentences on someone who was already facing the death penalty, suggesting it was unnecessary. However, Summit County Prosecutor Jacket Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should stay the same. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common Court supported the prosecutor's stance, stating that imposing multiple consecutive sentences was necessary to accurately represent Richard's criminal behavior. During the trial, Richard asked if he could get back a Celtic cross that had been seized during the investigation. He explained that the necklace had been in his family for generations and he wanted to give it to his newly married daughter. He insisted it was not related to the case, and it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It's striking that a man convicted of murdering many innocent people would present himself as a loving father. This raises questions about whether his behavior towards his daughter was truly genuine or simply a strategy to appear compassionate to the jury. Richard's mother was there, convinced of his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, Scott, and the confession of his accomplice who testified in court, Richard had to accept the consequences of his actions. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother did not speak further. Richard appealed the verdict but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has continuously claimed he is innocent, but no one believes him. He is currently at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard was close to evading capture, but his gun jammed, giving Scott the chance to escape. If Scott hadn't escaped and reported the incident, the serial killer in the woods might not have been discovered, leading to more victims. The situation began with an online job ad that the victims accepted without question.